When you save a mafia boss's life, you don't get thanks. You get a bullet to the head. Or worse, you get his attention. Liana Cruz knew it the moment she whispered a warning into the ear of Enzo Varelli, the most dangerous man in the city. A foolish choice, a deadly mistake. But when her enemies come after her, when blood spills in her tiny apartment, when the secret she'd kept for 5 years stands before him, a child with his eyes, it's too late to turn back. Follow this story to the end. Like and comment where you're watching from, so I know how far this story has come. The dining room smelled like cigar smoke and old money. Dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers catching the light just right. White tablecloths starched so stiff they could stand on their own. Romano's wasn't the kind of place that advertised. You either knew about it or you didn't matter. Liana Cruz didn't matter. She knew that. The heavy tray in her hands reminded her with every step. 8 plates, each one worth more than her weekly paycheck. Her feet ached in the cheap black flats she'd worn through at the heels. The uniform they'd given her was too tight across the shoulders, fabric pulling every time she reached. But she smiled anyway. Smiled and kept her head down and pretended not to hear the conversations floating around her. That was the job. Be invisible. Be forgettable. She'd clocked in at Romano's 3 months ago, picking up weekend shifts to cover what the hospital didn't pay. Nurses' aid wages didn't stretch far in a city where rent climbed faster than she could count. Not when you had a kid, not when you were alone. The private dining room sat at the back, past the main floor, through a hallway lined with black and white photos of people who looked important in that old world way. Men in fedoras, women with victory rolls, the kind of history that felt heavy, like it was watching. She pushed through the door with her hip, tray balanced, and the noise hit her first. Laughter. Loud, unrestrained, the kind that came from people who didn't worry about disturbing anyone because no one would dare complain. A dozen men in tailored suits crowded around a long table, glasses raised, voices overlapping. At the head sat a man maybe 35, dark hair swept back, jawline sharp enough to cut. He wasn't laughing, he was watching, eyes cold and assessing even as he smiled at whatever toast was being made. Enzo Varelli. Liana had heard the name before. You didn't work in this part of the city without hearing it. Whispers in break rooms, warnings from coworkers who'd been around longer. Stay away from that family. Keep your head down if you see them. She set the plates down carefully, one by one, her hands steady even though her pulse wasn't. No one looked at her. She was wallpaper, furniture, exactly what she needed to be. Except for the woman. She sat beside Enzo, close enough that their chairs touched. Mid-20s, blonde hair styled in perfect waves, a dress that probably cost more than Liana's car. She leaned into him, whispering something that made him nod once, barely, before returning his attention to the man giving the toast. The woman's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression flickering, just for a second, before she stood and excused herself with a delicate hand on Enzo's shoulder. Liana stepped back toward the wall, tray empty now, waiting for the next course. She should have left. Should have slipped out while they were distracted. But the head waiter had been clear, stay until dismissed, don't make them ask for you. The blonde woman walked past, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low. She moved toward the far corner of the room, near the windows where the curtains hung heavy and dark. Liana stayed where she was, hands folded, eyes down. But she could hear. Tomorrow night, 10:30. He'll be at the warehouse on 5th. The woman's voice was soft, almost sweet. Like she was ordering flowers. No, he won't have the full detail. Just Marco and Tony. I made sure of it. Liana's stomach dropped. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there, every muscle locked, her brain screaming at her to leave. Walk away. Forget you heard anything. Yes, I'm sure. I'll keep him busy until 11. That gives you plenty of time. A pause. Just make it quick. I don't want him to suffer. The woman's heels clicked as she turned, phone slipping back into her purse, her face smooth and pleasant like she'd been discussing dinner reservations. She walked back to the table, sliding into her seat beside Enzo, her hand resting on his arm with casual affection. Liana's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She should have walked out, should have finished her shift, collected her paycheck, gone home to Matteo, and never thought about this place again. But her feet wouldn't move. Because she kept seeing Enzo Varelli's face, the way he'd smiled at the woman beside him, the way he'd raised his glass when the toast was made, unaware that the person he trusted most had just scheduled his murder. Liana didn't know him anything. He was a criminal, dangerous, the kind of man her mother would have crossed the street to avoid. But he was also a human being, and tomorrow night he'd walk into a trap. Her hand shook as she picked up another tray from the service station. She didn't let herself think. If she thought, she'd stop. If she stopped, she'd run. She moved through the room, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates. The men barely noticed her. The blonde woman didn't even glance up, but Enzo did. Just once. His eyes tracked her movement across the room, a flicker of awareness in that cold, calculating gaze. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then he looked away, back to the conversation, and she was invisible again. Liana's chance came when dessert was served. Tiramisu in delicate glass cups, espresso on the side. She moved around the table, setting them down with careful precision, her pulse roaring in her ears. When she reached Enzo, she leaned in, just slightly, just enough. Tomorrow night, warehouse on 5th, 10:30, it's a trap. The words came out in a whisper, barely audible, her lips hardly moving. She didn't wait for a reaction, didn't look at him, just set the dessert down and moved on to the next seat, her face blank, her hand steady. But she felt it, the way the air shifted, the way his entire body went still. She finished the round and walked out, tray in hand, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. She made it to the kitchen, set the tray down, and leaned against the wall, sucking in air like she'd been drowning. "You good?" One of the other servers, an older woman named Carmen, glanced over, eyebrows raised. "Yeah, just tired. Join the club." Carmen grabbed another tray and disappeared back into the fray. Liana stayed there for a full minute, her mind racing, trying to process what she'd just done. She'd just warned a crime lord about a hit. She'd just interfered in something that was none of her business. She'd just painted a target on her own back. Stupid. So stupid, but done. It was done. She finished her shift on autopilot, clearing tables, washing dishes, counting tips. $43. Not bad for a Saturday. She stuffed the cash into her purse, changed out of the uniform in the employee bathroom, and walked out into the October night. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust. She pulled her jacket tighter and headed for the bus stop, her mind already shifting to the next thing. Picking up Mateo from her neighbor's apartment, heating up leftover mac and cheese, getting him into bed before she collapsed. She didn't notice the black car idling across the street, didn't see the man in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, eyes locked on her as she walked. Enzo didn't react, not outwardly. He took a sip of his espresso, nodded at something his uncle said, and let the conversation wash over him like white noise. But his mind was working. Tomorrow night, warehouse on 5th, 10:30. It's a trap. The waitress had already disappeared, dark hair pulled back, tired eyes, a uniform that didn't quite fit. He'd noticed her earlier, the way you notice anything out of place. She moved carefully, efficiently, like someone used to being overlooked, and she'd just risked her life to warn him. Enzo didn't trust easily. Trust got you killed. But he trusted patterns, and this didn't fit. If it was a setup, it was a clumsy one. Too direct, too risky. Whoever sent her would have been smarter, subtler, which meant she'd overheard something, and instead of keeping her mouth shut like any sane person, she'd warned him. Idiot. He glanced at Isabella, his fiancée, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile bright and warm as she laughed at something Marco said. They'd been together 2 years, engaged for 6 months. She came from a good family, connected, respected, the kind of alliance that made sense on paper. But Enzo hadn't built his empire on paper. He pulled out his phone under the table and sent a single text to Luca, his head of security. "Check the warehouse on 5th, tomorrow night. Be discreet." The reply came 30 seconds later. "On it." Enzo slipped the phone away and forced himself back into the moment. The toast, the laughter, the performance. But part of him was already gone, calculating, planning. If the waitress was right, someone close to him had just tried to set him up. And if she was wrong, he'd wasted a text. Either way, he'd know soon enough. Liana made it home just after midnight. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Cracked tile in the lobby, a flickering light on the 3rd floor landing, the faint smell of something burnt seeping from one of the units. Home. She unlocked the door quietly, stepping inside, and found her neighbor Mrs. Tron asleep on the couch, the TV playing some late-night infomercial on mute. Mateo was curled up in his bed, blankets tangled around his legs, his stuffed dinosaur clutched to his chest. Liana stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him breathe. 5 years old. Dark curls that never stayed flat, eyes that saw everything, her entire world. She woke Mrs. Tran gently, paid her $20, and locked the door behind her. Then she kicked off her shoes, washed her face, and collapsed into bed, still half-dressed. Sleep came hard. Her mind kept replaying the moment, the blonde woman's voice, Enzo's cold stare, the whispered warning. "What did you do, Liana?" She didn't have an answer. Enzo didn't sleep much. He left the party early, citing a headache, and Isabella had kissed his cheek and promised to see him tomorrow. He'd smiled and said something non-committal and watched her leave in the car he'd sent for her. Then he went to work. Luca met him at the penthouse, a stack of files already spread across the table. Surveillance photos, financial records, phone logs. Warehouse on 5th is owned by the Castellano family, Luca said, flipping through the images. They've been quiet for months, no movement, no chatter. Until now. Luca tapped a photo, a grainy shot of 2 men standing outside the warehouse. These 2 showed up 3 hours ago, Castellano's enforcers. Enzo studied the image, his jaw tight. Isabella set this up. It wasn't a question. Luca didn't flinch. "You want me to confirm? I want you to be ready." Enzo leaned back, his mind already 3 steps ahead. "Tomorrow night, I'm going to that warehouse, and I'm going to find out who's stupid enough to think they can kill me." "And Isabella?" Enzo's expression didn't change. She made her choice. The next day crawled. Liana dragged herself through her morning shift at the hospital, her body running on fumes and bad coffee. She changed bedpans, took vitals, smiled at patients who didn't smile back. Her supervisor pulled her aside at lunch and reminded her again that she needed to finish her certification if she wanted to move up. She nodded and said she was working on it, and didn't mention that working on it required time and money she didn't have. After her shift, she picked up Mateo from daycare. He chattered the whole way home, telling her about the tower he'd built with blocks, and how Mia had knocked it over and how he'd rebuilt it even taller. She listened, half present, her mind somewhere else. Tomorrow night, warehouse on 5th. Had Enzo listened? Had he believed her? Or had she just made everything worse? She fed Mateo dinner, chicken nuggets and green beans, and let him watch cartoons while she folded laundry. The routine was comforting, predictable, safe. At 8, she put him to bed, read him 2 stories, and kissed his forehead. "Love you, Mama," he mumbled, already half asleep. "Love you too, baby." She closed the door and stood in the hallway, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting a message from Carmen, or maybe a reminder about her next shift. Instead, it was a number she didn't recognize. "You should have stayed quiet." Liana's blood turned to ice. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking, her mind racing. Before she could respond, the phone buzzed again. "We know where you live." The world tilted. She dropped the phone, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and ran to the window. The street below was empty. No cars, no movement. But they knew. Someone knew what she'd done, and they were coming. Enzo walked into the warehouse at exactly 10:30. The place was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed sound. Empty crates lined the walls. A single light hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft. He wasn't alone. Luca and 6 of his best men were positioned around the perimeter, weapons ready, eyes sharp. Enzo walked to the center of the space and waited. At 10:35, they came. Footsteps echoed from the far end. 4 men, guns drawn, confidence radiating from every step. Castellano's crew. The leader, a man Enzo recognized as Marco's cousin, grinned. "Virelli, right on time." Enzo didn't move. "Where's Isabella?" "Somewhere safe. Counting your money, probably." The man laughed, and the others joined in. "Wrong answer!" Enzo's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Luca stepped out from the shadows, and the others followed, surrounding the Castellano crew in seconds. The laughter died. "You really thought this would work?" Enzo asked, his tone almost conversational. "You thought I wouldn't know?" Marco's cousin went pale. "Wait. No." The gunfire was brief, efficient. When the smoke cleared, 4 bodies lay on the concrete, and Enzo was already walking toward the exit. "Clean it up," he told Luca. "And Isabella?" Enzo paused, his expression unreadable. "Find her. Bring her to me." "What?" Liana didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, every light in the apartment on, a kitchen knife in her lap, her eyes locked on the door. The messages had stopped after the second one. No more texts, no calls. But the silence was worse. At 3 in the morning, she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside her door. Liana's grip tightened on the knife, her heart slamming against her ribs. A knock. 3 sharp raps. She didn't move. Another knock. "Liana Cruz." A man's voice, low and calm. "Open the door." She stood, her legs shaking, and moved toward the peephole. The man outside was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, his expression neutral. Behind him, she could see another man, and another. "We're not here to hurt you," the first man said. "Mr. Varelli sent us." Liana's stomach dropped. "Open the door, Ms. Cruz, or we'll open it for you." She looked back toward Mateo's room. The door was still closed. He was still asleep. Her hand moved to the lock. The moment she opened it, 2 men stepped inside, their movements quick and professional. One checked the apartment while the other stayed with her, his hand resting casually near his jacket, where she assumed a gun was hidden. "Get dressed," he said. "You're coming with us." "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice shook, but she held the knife tighter. The man's expression didn't change. "Mr. Varelli wants to see you. You can come willingly, or we can make it difficult. Your choice." "My son." "We'll be safe. We'll have someone stay with him." "No." Liana's voice cracked. "I'm not leaving him." The man sighed, pulled out his phone, and made a call. 30 seconds later, he handed it to her. "Ms. Cruz?" Enzo's voice was quiet, controlled. "You saved my life. Now let me save yours. People know what you did. They're coming for you. You can trust me, or you can wait here and see what happens when they arrive." Liana's throat closed. "Please," Enzo said, and for the first time she heard something almost human in his voice. "Let me help." She looked at Mateo's door, at the knife in her hand, at the men standing in her living room, and she made a choice. "I'm bringing my son." "Of course." She handed the phone back, set the knife down, and walked into Mateo's room. He woke slowly, confused, rubbing his eyes as she lifted him into her arms. "Mama?" "We're going on a trip, baby, just for a little while." He rested his head on her shoulder, already drifting back to sleep. Liana walked out of the apartment, past the men in suits, and into the hallway. She didn't look back, because the door had already closed behind her, and there was no going home. The car smelled like leather and something else, cologne maybe, or gun oil. Liana couldn't tell. She sat in the back seat with Mateo curled against her chest, his small body warm and trusting, his breathing steady in sleep. She kept one hand on his back, the other gripping the door handle like it might save her if things went sideways. They didn't talk to her. The 2 men in front kept their eyes on the road, communicating in glances and head nods she couldn't read. The city slid past the tinted windows, familiar streets growing unfamiliar as they moved into parts of town she'd only seen from the highway. Taller buildings, cleaner sidewalks, the kind of neighborhoods where people didn't worry about making rent. The car turned into an underground garage, descending 3 levels before pulling into a spot near an elevator. One of the men got out first, scanning the area with practiced efficiency before opening her door. "This way." Liana climbed out carefully, adjusting Mateo in her arms. He weighed 42 pounds, and her back was already screaming, but she wasn't putting him down. Not here. Not with these people. The elevator was mirrored on all sides. She avoided looking at herself, didn't want to see the fear she knew was written all over her face. The numbers climbed. 12, 15, 20. When the doors opened, they stepped into a hallway that looked like something from a magazine. Marble floors, Recessed lighting, artwork that probably cost more than her car. The penthouse, of course it was a penthouse. One of the men knocked twice on the double doors at the end of the hall, then pushed them open without waiting for an answer. The space beyond was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, a kitchen with countertops so pristine they could have been operating tables. And standing near the windows, phone pressed to his ear, was Enzo Varelli. He looked different than he had at the restaurant. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He glanced over when they entered, said something short into the phone, and hung up. "Miss Cruz?" His voice was quieter than she expected, almost polite. "Thank you for coming. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." He gestured toward a couch. "Sit, please." Liana didn't move. "What do you want?" Enzo studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Matteo, still asleep against her shoulder, and something shifted in his face. Just for a second. "Your son?" "Yes." "How old?" 5. He nodded slowly like he was filing the information away. "There's a bedroom down the hall, second door on the right. You can put him to bed there." "I'm not—" "Ms. Cruz?" Enzo's tone didn't change, but the weight behind it did. "I'm not going to hurt you, or your son, but we need to talk and he needs to sleep, so please, put him to bed." Liana's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Matteo and bolt for the elevator. But Enzo was right about one thing. Matteo needed to sleep, and she needed answers. She walked down the hall, found the bedroom, bigger than her entire apartment, with a bed that looked like a cloud, and laid Matteo down gently. He stirred, mumbling something about dinosaurs, then settled back into sleep. She pulled a blanket over him, smoothed his hair, and stood there for a moment, trying to breathe. When she came back to the living room, Enzo was pouring 2 glasses of water. He slid one across the counter toward her. "Sit." "I'm fine standing. Suit yourself." Took a sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You warned me about the hit." "I know." "Why?" Liana crossed her arms. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because people don't do things for no reason, especially not dangerous things. So I'm asking, why did you risk your life to warn me?" She looked away, out at the city lights stretching to the horizon. "I heard her on the phone. Your fiancée. She was setting you up." "I know that now." "So why does it matter why I told you?" "Because I need to know if I can trust you." Liana laughed, sharp and bitter. "You need to know if you can trust me? You're the one who had your guys drag me out of my apartment in the middle of the night." "I didn't drag you, I invited you." "With guns." Enzo's expression didn't change. "The people who wanted me dead know you warned me, which means they want you dead too. I'm offering protection." "I don't need your protection." "Yes, you do." "No, The words died in her throat when Enzo pulled out his phone and set it on the counter between them. The screen showed a photo. Grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. Her apartment building, the front entrance, time stamped 2 hours ago. "They know where you live," Enzo said quietly. "They know you have a son. And they're not going to stop until you're gone." Liana's hands shook. She shoved them in her pockets. "So what do you want from me?" "I want you to stay here, where I can keep you safe." "For how long?" "Until it's handled." "And then what?" "Then you go home." She stared at him, trying to read the angle, the trap, but his face gave away nothing. "Why do you care?" "You saved my life." "So now you owe me?" "Something like that." Liana shook her head. "I can't stay here. I have a job, 2 jobs, bills. My son has daycare. I'll take care of it." "You can't just—" "I can." Enzo leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Ms. Cruz, I don't know what your life looks like, but I know what happens to people who cross the Castellanos. They don't get warnings. They don't get second chances. They get a bullet, and their families get flowers at the funeral. So you can fight me on this, or you can let me help. But either way, you're not going back to that apartment." The words hit like a fist. Liana's throat tightened, her vision blurring at the edges. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that she could handle it, that she didn't need some criminal playing hero. But she couldn't, because he was right. She sank onto the couch, her legs giving out. How long? Few days, maybe a week. And my jobs? I'll make calls, you'll still get paid. She looked up at him, suspicion cutting through the exhaustion. Why are you doing this? Enzo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because you didn't have to warn me. You could have walked away. But you didn't. And that means something. To who? To me. Liana didn't sleep. She tried. Lay down in the guest room next to Mateo's, stared at the ceiling, listened to the city hum 20 stories below. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the messages. The photo of her building, the men standing outside her door. At 4 a.m, she gave up and went to the kitchen. Enzo was already there. He stood at the counter, a laptop open in front of him, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. He didn't look up when she walked in. Can't sleep? He asked. No? Coffee? Sure. He poured her a cup without asking how she took it, black, no sugar, and slid it across the counter. She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat soak into her palms. What are you working on? She asked. Cleaning up a mess? The hit? Among other things. She took a sip, the bitterness cutting through the fog in her head. What happened to her? Your fiancée. Enzo's fingers paused on the keyboard. She's gone. Gone where? Does it matter? I guess not. He closed the laptop and looked at her. Really looked. Not the assessing stare from before, but something quieter, heavier. You should try to sleep. I can't. Why? Because I don't know what happens next. Nothing happens next. You stay here. You stay safe. That's it. And when it's over, you go back to your life. Liana laughed, the sound hollow. What life? I'm a nurse's aide who works weekends at a restaurant to make rent. I've got $43 in tips and a kid who thinks mac and cheese is a food group. That's my life. And now some mafia family wants me dead because I did the right thing for once. Enzo didn't respond, just watched her, his expression unreadable. Sorry, she muttered, looking away. I'm tired. You don't have to apologize. Yeah, I do. You're helping me. I should be grateful. Gratitude's overrated. She glanced at him, surprised. What? You think I want you to be grateful? I want you to be safe. There's a difference. Why? Because you didn't deserve this. Neither did you. Enzo's jaw tightened. Yes, I did. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Liana didn't know what to say to that, so she just sipped her coffee and tried not to think about the fact that she was sitting in a penthouse with a man who'd probably killed more people than she'd saved. Mateo woke up at 6, confused and cranky, asking where they were and why his bed was so big, and where was his dinosaur. Liana found the stuffed toy still clutched in his hand and kissed his forehead. We're staying with a friend for a few days, baby. What friend? His name is Enzo. Is he nice? She hesitated. I don't know yet. Mateo seemed satisfied with that answer and wandered into the living room, dragging his dinosaur behind him. Enzo was still at the counter, now reading something on his phone. He looked up when Mateo appeared, and for a second Liana saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Hi, Mateo said, tilting his head. Are you Mama's friend? Enzo set the phone down. I guess I am. Do you have cartoons? I can find some. Okay. Enzo picked up a remote, and within seconds, the massive TV on the wall came to life. He scrolled through channels until he found something animated, then handed the remote to Mateo. Thank you, Mateo said, already absorbed. Enzo glanced at Liana, and she saw it again, that flicker of something she couldn't name. He's polite, Enzo said quietly. I taught him that. You did a good job. Don't. Don't what? Don't compliment me like you know us. You don't. Enzo's expression hardened. I wasn't trying to. I need to call my boss. And the daycare. And my neighbor. Liana's voice was clipped, defensive. Can I use a phone? Use mine. He handed her his cell without hesitation. She took it, walked into the hallway, and made the calls. Each one felt like pulling teeth. Explaining without explaining. Lying without lying. By the time she finished, her head was pounding. When she came back, Matteo was eating cereal at the counter, and Enzo was gone. One of the men from last night, Luca, she'd heard Enzo call him, stood near the door instead. "Where did he go?" she asked. "Meeting." "When's he coming back?" "When he's done." "Helpful." Liana sat beside Matteo, watching him eat, and tried to ignore the weight pressing down on her chest. Enzo didn't come back until late afternoon. When he walked in, his knuckles were bruised, and there was a cut above his eyebrow that hadn't been there before. Liana looked up from the couch, where she'd been reading one of Matteo's books for the third time. "What happened?" "Work." "You're bleeding." "I'm fine." "You should clean that." "I will." But he didn't. Just walked to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and downed it in one swallow. Matteo looked up from his coloring book. "You got a boo-boo." Enzo glanced at him, then at Liana. "Yeah, I guess I do. Mama says you need a Band-Aid for boo-boos." "Does she?" "Uh-huh." Enzo's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'll keep that in mind." Liana stood, grabbing a clean towel from the kitchen. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "Sit down." Enzo hesitated, then sank onto one of the bar stools. Liana wet the towel and stepped closer, tilting his head back to get a better look at the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was still bleeding. She pressed the towel against it, and he flinched. "Sorry," she muttered. "It's fine." "Stay still." "Bossy." "Stupid." He almost smiled. "Fair." She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with careful precision. This close, she could see the faint scars along his jawline, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the counter like he was holding himself in place. "Who did this?" she asked quietly. "Someone who won't do it again." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." She pulled back, dropping the towel into the sink. "You should see a doctor." "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." Liana crossed her arms, studying him. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Probably." "And you're okay with that?" Enzo met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the surface. "I've been okay with it for a long time." The words landed like stones. Before she could respond, Matteo appeared at her side, holding up his coloring book. "Look, Mama, I made a dinosaur." Liana forced a smile, crouching down. "That's amazing, baby. Can I show Enzo?" She glanced up at Enzo, who was watching them both with that same unreadable expression. "Sure," she said. Matteo climbed onto the stool beside Enzo and held up the book. "See? It's a T-Rex. They're the strongest." Enzo looked at the drawing, messy crayon scribbles in green and red. "It's good." "Thanks. Do you like dinosaurs?" "I don't know much about them." "I can teach you." Enzo's expression softened. "Yeah?" "Yeah, there's lots of kinds. T-Rex is the best, but Mama says Triceratops is cool too." "Your mama's smart." Matteo nodded seriously. "I know." Liana watched them, her chest tightening in a way she didn't understand. This man, this violent, dangerous man, was listening to her son talk about dinosaurs like it was the most important conversation in the world. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that terrified her more than anything else. That night, after Matteo was asleep, Liana found Enzo on the balcony. He stood at the railing, a glass of whiskey in one hand, staring out at the city. The wind tugged at his shirt, and for a moment he looked almost tired. She stepped outside, pulling her jacket tighter against the cold. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Why do you live like this?" He took a sip. "Like what?" "Alone. In a place this big, with people trying to kill you." Enzo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's easier than the alternative." "Which is?" "Caring about someone and losing them." The honesty caught her off guard. She moved to the railing beside him, keeping a few feet of distance. "That why you never had kids?" "I never wanted them." "Why not?" "Because this world doesn't need more people like me." Liana looked at him, really looked. "You don't believe that." "Yes, I do." "Then why are you helping us?" He didn't answer. She pressed. "You could have sent us somewhere safe, paid for a hotel, but you brought us here. Why?" Because I wanted to. That's not a reason. It's the only one I have. Liana's frustration bubbled over. You don't make sense. 1 minute you're bleeding on your counter, talking about getting killed like it's inevitable. The next you're listening to my son talk about dinosaurs like you actually care. So which is it? Are you the guy who doesn't care about anything, or are you pretending? Enzo turned to face her, his eyes sharp. Maybe I'm both. That's not possible. Why not? Because you can't be two people at once. You'd be surprised. She shook her head. I don't understand you. Good. Don't try. Why? Because the more you understand, the harder it is to leave. The words hit her like a slap. Liana stepped back, her heart racing. I'm not staying. I know. I mean it. When this is over, I'm gone. I know. So stop. Stop acting like we're going to be friends or something. Enzo's expression didn't change. I'm not acting like anything. I'm just keeping you alive. Then do that and nothing else. Fine. Fine. She turned and walked back inside, her hands shaking, her chest tight with something she refused to name. Behind her, Enzo stayed on the balcony, staring out at the city, his drink untouched. The next 2 days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Liana kept to herself, staying in the guest room or the kitchen, avoiding Enzo as much as possible. He seemed fine with that, came and went without explanation, his knuckles healing slowly, his expression as unreadable as ever. Matteo, on the other hand, had decided Enzo was his new favorite person. He followed him around when he was home, asking endless questions about everything. Why was the building so tall? Did Enzo have a car? Could they watch more cartoons? Did he want to see the new dinosaur drawing? And Enzo, impossibly, answered every single one. Liana watched from a distance, her unease growing with every interaction. Because Matteo didn't just like Enzo, he trusted him. And that was a problem. On the third night, she confronted him. You need to stop. Enzo looked up from the laptop he'd been working on. Stop what? Encouraging him. He's getting attached. He's 5. He gets attached to everything. Not like this. Like what? Like he thinks you're going to stick around. Enzo closed the laptop. I never said I would. You didn't have to. You're acting like his friend, like you care. Maybe I do. Liana's stomach twisted. Don't. Why not? Because when this is over, we're leaving. And he's going to ask about you. And I'm going to have to explain that you're not part of our lives. That you were just helping us. And it's going to break his heart. So what do you want me to do? Ignore him. Enzo's jaw tightened. No. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not going to ignore a kid because you're scared. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. Of what? Of me. Of this? Of the fact that maybe, just maybe, you don't hate being here as much as you thought you would. The accusation hung between them, sharp and cutting. Liana's hands clenched into fists. You don't know anything about me. I know you work 2 jobs to keep your son fed. I know you're exhausted. I know you warned a stranger about a hit because you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't. And I know you're terrified that if you let your guard down for 1 second, everything's going to fall apart. Her throat closed. Stop. Why? Because I'm right? Because it's none of your business. You made it my business when you saved my life. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I. The words echoed in the space between them. Liana's breath came in short, sharp bursts. Enzo's chest rose and fell, his eyes locked on hers. And then, from the hallway, a small voice. Mama? They both turned. Matteo stood in the doorway, his dinosaur clutched to his chest, his eyes wide and scared. Liana's heart shattered. She crossed the room in 3 steps, scooping him into her arms. Hey, baby, it's okay. We were just talking. You were yelling. I know. I'm sorry. Are you mad at Enzo? She looked over at Enzo, who stood frozen near the counter, his expression unreadable. No, she lied. I'm not mad. Then why were you yelling? Because sometimes grown-ups yell when they're tired. But it's okay. Everything's okay. Matteo buried his face in her shoulder. I don't like it. I know. I'm sorry. She carried him back to bed, tucked him in, and sat beside him until his breathing evened out. When she came back to the living room, Enzo was gone.
You're watching it.
She didn't see him the next day. Luca said he was handling something. Didn't say what. Didn't say when he'd be back. Liana tried not to care. Tried to focus on Matteo, on keeping him entertained, on pretending everything was fine. But the silence in the penthouse felt heavier without Enzo there, and that scared her more than anything. He came back at midnight. Liana was awake, sitting on the couch with a book she wasn't reading, when she heard the door open. Enzo walked in, looking worse than before, blood on his shirt, a bruise forming along his cheekbone, his movements slow, deliberate, like every step hurt. She stood. What happened? Nothing. That's not nothing. It's handled. Enzo, it's handled, Liana. Her name. He'd never used her name before. She swallowed. You need a doctor. I need a shower. After that, you need a doctor. After that, I need sleep. He walked past her toward the hallway and she followed without thinking. Stop being stubborn. Stop being bossy. I'm a nurse's aide. It's literally my job. Not anymore. You're on vacation. This isn't a vacation. Could have fooled me. She grabbed his arm and he stopped. They stood there too close, the air thick with something she didn't want to name. Let me help, she said quietly. Enzo looked at her and for the first time his guard dropped. Just a crack. Just enough for her to see the exhaustion beneath. Fine, he said. Whoa. She cleaned his wounds in the bathroom, her hands steady even though her heart wasn't. The cut on his ribs was deep, probably needed stitches. But he wouldn't go to a hospital, so she did her best with what she had. Butterfly bandages and medical tape from the first aid kit Luca had brought. Enzo sat on the edge of the tub, shirtless, watching her work. You're good at this, he said. I've had practice. With who? Patients, at the hospital. They get stabbed a lot? More than you'd think. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Liana finished the last bandage and stepped back. You should rest. I will. I mean it. You keep pushing like this, you're going to… What? Die? She flinched. He stood, moving carefully. I'm not going to die, Liana. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because I'm not done yet. Done with what? He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Keeping you safe. The words were simple, honest, and they broke something inside her. She turned away, her hands shaking. You should get some sleep. Liana. Good night, Enzo. She walked out before he could say anything else, before she could do something stupid, like believe him. Go. The next morning, everything changed. Liana woke to the sound of voices, low, urgent, coming from the living room. She pulled on a sweatshirt and stepped into the hallway. Enzo was at the counter, Luca beside him, both of them staring at a laptop screen. What's going on? She asked. Enzo looked up, his expression grim. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that means you can't go home. Her stomach dropped. What? Luca turned the laptop toward her. The screen showed a series of photos, her apartment, the front entrance, the hallway outside her door. And in the last one, a man standing in her living room holding Matteo's stuffed dinosaur. Liana's world tilted. They broke in, Enzo said quietly. Last night. They know you're not there, and they're not going to stop looking. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. How long? She whispered. Until it's safe. How long, Enzo? He hesitated. I don't know. The answer was a knife to the chest, because it meant she couldn't go back. Not to her apartment, not to her jobs, not to the life she'd built. She was trapped. And the man who'd saved her was the only thing standing between her and the people who wanted her dead. Liana looked at Matteo's door, then back at Enzo. What do we do? Enzo's jaw tightened. We fight. But before he could say anything else, his phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting from grim to something darker. When? A pause. Where? Another pause. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Liana. I have to go. What happened? They found her. Who? Isabella. Liana's blood ran cold. Where? The docks. She's alive, barely. What does that mean? Enzo grabbed his jacket. It means someone else wants me to know they can get to anyone I care about. Do they know about us? He stopped, looked at her. Not yet. But they will. Yes. She stepped closer. Then take us with you. No. Enzo. I said no. You stay here. Luca stays with you. I'll be back in 2 hours. And if you're not? His expression softened, just slightly. Then you run. He left. And Liana stood in the middle of the penthouse, Matteo still asleep down the hall, Luca watching her from across the room. She didn't run. She couldn't. Because somewhere between the warnings and the wounds and the way Enzo had looked at her son like he mattered, she'd stopped wanting to. And that realization was more terrifying than anything else. Because when Enzo came back, if he came back, she was going to have to tell him the truth. The one she'd been hiding since the moment she saw him at Romano's. The one that would change everything. Matteo wasn't just her son. He was Enzo's. And there was no going back from that. The silence after Enzo left felt like drowning. Liana stood in the middle of the penthouse, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind racing through every possible outcome. None of them were good. Enzo was walking into a trap. She could feel it in her bones. And she was standing here doing nothing. Luca moved to the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian she couldn't follow. His body language was tense, coiled, like he was preparing for something violent. She looked down the hall toward Matteo's room, still sleeping, still safe. For now. Her phone, Enzo's phone, the one he'd let her borrow, sat on the counter. She picked it up, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could call someone. The police, maybe. But what would she say? That she was hiding from a mafia family in a crime lord's penthouse? That her 5-year-old son was... She stopped. The truth sat in her chest like a stone. Matteo wasn't just her son. He was Enzo's. And she'd kept that secret for 5 years because she'd convinced herself it was safer that way. Easier, less complicated. But nothing about this was simple anymore. She remembered that night, 6 years ago. A hospital charity event she'd worked as staff, serving drinks to donors who barely looked at her. Enzo had been there, younger then, less controlled, grief written all over his face because his father had died 2 weeks earlier. She'd found him on the balcony, alone, staring at nothing. They'd talked, just talked at first, about loss, about feeling invisible, about the weight of expectations neither of them had asked for, and then they'd done more than talk. One night, one mistake, one moment of weakness that had resulted in a pregnancy she'd discovered 3 weeks later when Enzo was already gone, back to his world, unreachable, untouchable. She'd never told him, never tried to find him, because what was the point? He was a criminal. She was nobody. And Matteo deserved better than a father who killed people for a living, except now that father was risking his life to keep them safe, and she was about to destroy him with the truth. Luca ended his call and turned to her. We need to move you. What? Not safe here anymore. Boss's orders. If he doesn't come back in 90 minutes, I take you to a secondary location. Where? You don't need to know that yet. Liana's hands clenched. I'm not going anywhere until Enzo comes back. That's not your choice. The hell it isn't. Luca's expression didn't change. Ms. Cruz, I understand you're scared, but my job is to keep you and your son alive. So when I say we move, we move. And if I refuse, then I carry you. She believed him. Before she could respond, Luca's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. What? Liana asked. Get the kid. Now. What happened? Just do it. The urgency in his voice sent ice through her veins. She ran to Matteo's room, scooped him out of bed. He mumbled a protest but didn't wake, and carried him back to the living room. Luca was already at the door, gun drawn, his body positioned between them and the hallway. What's going on? Liana whispered. Someone's in the building. Her stomach dropped. How? Doesn't matter. We're leaving. Stay behind me. He opened the door, checked the hallway, then motioned for her to follow. They moved quickly, Matteo heavy in her arms, her breath coming in short bursts. The elevator was at the end of the hall, 20 feet that felt like 20 miles. They were halfway there when the stairwell door burst open. 3 men, guns raised. Luca fired first. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Liana screamed, covering Matteo's ears, her body curling around him as Luca emptied his clip into the first 2 men. They went down hard, blood spattering the marble floor. The third man got a shot off. Luca staggered, clutching his shoulder, but didn't fall. He grabbed Liana's arm and shoved her toward the elevator. Go! You're shot. I said go. The elevator doors opened. She stumbled inside, Matteo waking now, crying, his small hands clutching her shirt. Luca followed, slamming the button for the garage level. The doors closed just as more gunfire erupted in the hallway. Mama, Matteo sobbed. Mama, what's happening? It's okay, baby. It's okay. Her voice shook so badly she could barely get the words out. Luca leaned against the wall, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. When we get to the garage, there's a black SUV in spot 12. Keys are in the visor. You drive. I can't. You don't have a choice. The elevator jolted to a stop. Garage level. The doors opened onto concrete and shadows and the smell of oil. Luca stepped out first, scanning the area. Clear. Move. Liana ran, Matteo bouncing against her hip, her legs burning. She found the SUV, yanked open the door, and shoved Matteo into the back seat. Buckle up, baby. Fast. Her hands shook as she pulled down the visor. The keys fell into her palm. Luca climbed into the passenger seat, his breathing labored. Drive to the exit. Don't stop for anything. She started the engine, threw it into gear, and floored it. The SUV screeched out of the spot, tires screaming against concrete. She aimed for the exit ramp, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Behind them, headlights flared to life. They're following, Luca said, his voice tight. What do I do? Drive faster. She did. The SUV roared up the ramp, bursting out onto the street. Traffic was light, thank God, but the car behind them was gaining. Turn left, Luca said. She yanked the wheel. The SUV fishtailed, slamming into a parked car before straightening out. Matteo screamed, I'm sorry, baby, I'm sorry! Right at the next light. She ran the red, horns blaring around them. The pursuing car stayed close, weaving through traffic like it was nothing. They're going to catch us, Liana said, her voice breaking. Luca pulled his phone out with his good hand, dialed, and pressed it to his ear. Boss, we're compromised, heading east on Parker. They're on us. A pause. Yeah, she's driving. Another pause. Copy that. He hung up and looked at Liana. 2 blocks ahead, there's an alley on the right. Take it. That's a dead end. Trust me. She didn't have time to argue. She jerked the wheel right, the SUV skidding into a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. Stop here. What? Stop the car. She slammed the brakes. The SUV lurched to a halt. Luca opened his door. Stay in the car. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me or the boss. Where are you going? To buy you time. He stepped out, gun in hand, and walked back toward the alley entrance. Liana's breath came in ragged gasps. She locked the doors, her hands trembling, and turned to check on Matteo. He was curled in the back seat, crying silently, his face buried in his dinosaur. It's okay, baby. We're okay. But she didn't believe it. She heard the gunfire before she saw it. Sharp cracks echoing off the brick walls. She ducked instinctively, covering her head, praying Matteo couldn't see. Then silence. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was coming. Liana's heart stopped. The footsteps got closer. A shadow fell across the windshield. She looked up. Enzo. He was covered in blood, not all of it his face a mask of controlled fury. He tried the door. Locked. She fumbled with the lock, her hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The door opened and Enzo leaned in. You okay? She nodded, unable to speak. He looked past her to Matteo. Hey kid, you all right? Matteo lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen. Enzo? Yeah, it's me. His voice softened. You're safe now. Matteo started crying again, but this time it sounded like relief. Enzo turned back to Liana. Move over. I'm driving. She scrambled into the passenger seat. Enzo slid behind the wheel, threw the SUV into reverse, and backed out of the alley. Luca was waiting at the entrance, leaning against the wall, his shirt soaked with blood. Enzo stopped beside him. "Get in. I'm good here." "Get in." Luca climbed into the back beside Matteo, his face gray. Enzo drove, fast, controlled, like he'd done this 100 times before. They didn't speak. The only sounds were the engine and Matteo's quiet sniffles, and Luca's labored breathing. After 10 minutes, Enzo pulled into an underground garage beneath a building Liana didn't recognize. He killed the engine and turned to Luca. "How bad?" "Through and through. I'll live." "Good. Because I need you alive to tell me how the fuck they found us." Luca's eyes narrowed. "I don't know." "Bullshit. I said I don't know." Enzo's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. He looked at Liana instead. "Come on, we're moving." She climbed out, lifting Matteo into her arms, even though her back was screaming. Enzo led them to another elevator, this one older, the walls scuffed and scratched. They rode in silence to the 8th floor. The safe house was smaller than the penthouse. 1 bedroom, a cramped living area, a kitchenette with a table that wobbled. But it was secure, reinforced door, no windows, cameras in every corner. Enzo set a bag on the table, supplies from the look of it, and turned to Liana. "Put him to bed." She hesitated. "Enzo, put him to bed, Liana, then we talk." The tone left no room for argument. She carried Matteo into the bedroom, laid him down, and stayed with him until his breathing evened out. When she came back, Enzo was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Luca was on the couch, a medical kit open beside him, wrapping his shoulder with practiced efficiency. "How did they find us?" Liana asked quietly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Enzo's voice was cold, controlled, but she could hear the rage underneath. "Could it have been Isabella?" "Isabella's dead." The words landed like a punch. Liana stared at him. "What?" "I found her at the docks. Someone put 2 bullets in her head and left her as a message." He pushed off the counter, pacing. "This wasn't about her. This was about sending me a warning. And they used you to do it." "I don't understand." "They wanted me distracted, so they leaked your location, sent a team to the penthouse, and forced me to choose between cleaning up Isabella's mess and keeping you safe." "But you came back." "Because I'm not stupid." He stopped, his eyes locking on hers. "But someone on my team is. Or worse, someone's working for them." Luca looked up sharply. "You think we have a rat?" "I think we have a problem, and until I know what it is, no one leaves this building." Liana's chest tightened. "For how long?" "Until I fix it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, but Matteo was sleeping 10 feet away, and falling apart wasn't an option, so she just nodded. Enzo's expression softened, barely. "Get some rest. I'll take first watch." "I can't sleep." "Try anyway." She didn't move, just stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on her. And then, before she could stop herself, she said it. "I need to tell you something." Enzo's eyes sharpened. "What?" "About Matteo." "What about him?" Liana's throat closed. She forced the words out anyway. "He's yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Enzo stared at her, his expression frozen. Luca stopped moving. Even the air seemed to still. "What?" Enzo's voice was barely a whisper. "Matteo. He's your son. That's not possible." 6 years ago, the hospital charity event. Your father had just died and you were on the balcony and we... She couldn't finish. Enzo's face went white. "You're lying." "I'm not. You would have told me." "How? You disappeared. And even if I could have found you, what was I supposed to say?" "Hey, remember that one night? You're going to be a father. Hope that doesn't interfere with your criminal empire." "You had no right. I had every right. I was pregnant and alone and terrified, and you were gone. So I made a choice. I kept him. I raised him. And I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd care." Enzo's hands clenched into fists. "You didn't think I'd care?" "No, I didn't. Because you're a criminal, Enzo. You kill people. You run an empire built on blood and fear. And I didn't want that for my son." "Our son." The correction was quiet, lethal. Liana's breath hitched. What? You said your son. He's our son. Enzo, how long have you known? His voice was shaking now, the control slipping. How long have you been lying to me? I wasn't lying, How long? 5 years. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. Luca cleared his throat. Boss, get out. What? I said get out, now. Luca grabbed the medical kit and left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Liana and Enzo were alone. She'd never felt more exposed in her life. Enzo turned back to her, and the look on his face broke something inside her. Betrayal. Rage. And underneath it all, hurt. You let me sit here for days, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You let me talk to him, play with him, listen to him talk about dinosaurs, and the whole time you knew. I was going to tell you. When? I don't know. When, Liana? I don't know. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd believe me, or if you'd take him, or if I'd what? Hurt him? Enzo's laugh was bitter. You think I'd hurt my own son? I don't know what you'd do. I don't know you. You knew me well enough 6 years ago. The accusation hit like a slap. Liana's eyes burned. That was different. How? Because we were different people. You were grieving. I was nobody. And it was one night, Enzo, one stupid, reckless night that changed my entire life. So forgive me if I didn't think you'd want to be part of it. Enzo stepped closer, his eyes blazing. You should have told me. Why? So you could do what? Swoop in and play dad when it was convenient? Teach him how to break someone's ribs? Show him the family business? I would have helped you. I didn't need your help. Clearly, he gestured around the safe house. Look where not needing my help got you. The words stung because they were true. Liana's voice cracked. I was trying to protect him. From me. From your world. It's his world too, whether you like it or not. No, it's not. He's 5 years old. He likes dinosaurs and mac and cheese and bedtime stories. He doesn't belong in this. But he's in it now, because of you. The accusation landed like a knife. Liana's legs gave out. She sank onto the couch, her hands shaking, her chest heaving. I know, she whispered. I know it's my fault. I should have kept my mouth shut at the restaurant. I should have stayed invisible. But I didn't, and now we're here, and I'm sorry. Enzo stood over her, his expression unreadable. Sorry doesn't fix this. I know. Sorry doesn't give me back 5 years. I know. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you lied to me. I know. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I know I lied. I know I should have told you, but I was scared, Enzo. I'm still scared because every time I look at you, I see someone who could take him away from me, and he's all I have. Enzo's jaw worked. He looked away, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. I wouldn't take him from you. You say that now? I mean it. How do I know that? Because I know what it's like to grow up without a mother. He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw. My mother died when I was 8, cancer. My father raised me alone, and he did his best, but it wasn't enough. I spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, and I wouldn't do that to Matteo. Even if I hate you right now, I wouldn't do that to him. Liana's breath caught. You hate me? I don't know what I feel. Enzo ran a hand through his hair, his control fracturing. I just found out I have a son I've been talking to for 3 days without knowing he was mine. And you kept that from me, so yeah. Right now, I don't know what I feel, but it's not good. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Enzo turned toward the door. Where are you going? She asked. Out. You can't leave. You said no one leaves. I'm not no one. Enzo. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. I need to think, Liana, and I can't do that with you sitting there looking at me like I'm the villain. I don't think you're... Yes, you do. You've thought it since the moment you met me. And maybe you're right. Maybe I am. But that doesn't change the fact that Matteo is my son, and I'm not walking away from him. I'm not asking you to. Good. Because I won't. He opened the door and left. The sound of it closing felt like the end of something. Liana sat there, tears streaming down her face, her entire world crumbling around her. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't know how to fix it. Boss, Enzo didn't come back that night, or the next morning. Liana stayed in the safe house with Matteo, trying to keep him occupied, trying to pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't. Luca brought food, checked the perimeter, refused to answer any of her questions about where Enzo was or what he was doing. He'll come back when he's ready, was all Luca would say. Matteo asked about Enzo 3 times. Each time, Liana's heart broke a little more. He's working, baby. When's he coming back? I don't know. Is he mad at me? No, he's not mad at you. Then why isn't he here? She didn't have an answer for that. Enzo came back on the second night. Liana was putting Matteo to bed when she heard the door open. Her heart jumped into her throat. Stay here, she told Matteo. But stay. She closed the bedroom door and stepped into the living room. Enzo stood near the counter, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hi, she said quietly. Hi. Are you okay? No. At least he was honest. She took a tentative step closer. Did you find out who leaked our location? Yeah. Who? Marco. My uncle's nephew. Been on my payroll for 3 years. Turns out the Castellanos were paying him more. Is he dead? Yeah. Liana swallowed. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choice. Silence. Enzo looked toward the bedroom door. Is he asleep? Almost. Can I? He stopped. Can I see him? Liana's chest tightened. Of course. She led him to the bedroom. Matteo was curled under the blankets, his dinosaur tucked under his chin, his eyes drifting closed. Enzo stood in the doorway, just watching. Liana stayed behind him, her hands twisting together. He has my eyes, Enzo said finally. Yeah. And your nose. Yeah. Does he know? That you're his father? No. Are you going to tell him? I don't know. Are you going to stick around long enough for it to matter? Enzo turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I'm not going anywhere, Liana. You say that now. I mean it. For how long? A week? A month? Until this blows over and we're not useful anymore? Forever. The word hung in the air between them. Liana's throat closed. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. Why? Because he's my son, and I don't walk away from family. You don't even know him. Then I'll learn. It's not that simple. I don't care. Enzo, I don't care if it's simple or complicated or impossible. He's mine, and I'm going to be part of his life, whether you like it or not. Liana's hands shook. And what if I say no? Enzo's expression hardened. Then I'll fight you for custody. The threat was a knife to the gut. You wouldn't. Try me. She stepped back, her breath coming in short gasps. You're a criminal. No judge would. I'm a businessman with connections in every level of government. You're a nurse's aide with 2 part-time jobs and $43 in tips. Who do you think they'd side with? The words were cruel, calculated, and true. Liana's vision blurred. You bastard. Maybe. But I'm a bastard who's not going to let you keep my son from me. I wasn't keeping him from you. Then what do you call the last 5 years? Survival. The word echoed in the small space. Enzo's expression flickered. Liana's voice broke. I was surviving, Enzo. I was alone and scared and trying to figure out how to raise a kid on my own. And I made the best choice I could with the information I had. So I'm sorry if that wasn't good enough for you, but it's all I had. Enzo stared at her. Then he turned and walked out of the room. Liana followed. Where are you going? I need air. You can't leave. Watch me. She grabbed his arm. Enzo, please, don't do this. Do what? Don't make me choose between you and him. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm telling you there's no choice. He's my son, and I'm going to be his father. You can either accept that, or you can fight me. But either way, I'm not backing down. And if I can't accept it, then we're going to have a problem. He pulled his arm free and walked to the door. Enzo. He stopped. If you do this, if you try to take him from me, I'll never forgive you. He looked back at her, and the coldness in his eyes made her shiver. I don't need your forgiveness, Liana. I need my son. He left. And this time, when the door closed, it felt like something shattered. Liana didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, staring at the wall, replaying the conversation over and over. He'd threatened her, threatened to take Matteo. And the worst part was, she believed him. Enzo had the money, the power, the connections, and she had nothing. If he wanted to fight her for custody, he'd win, and she'd lose the only thing that mattered. The thought made her sick. Around 3 a.m, the bedroom door creaked open. Matteo padded out, rubbing his eyes. Mama? She forced a smile. Hey, baby, what's wrong? I had a bad dream. Come here. He climbed onto the couch, curling into her side. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his hair. It's okay, she whispered. You're safe. But as she sat there, holding her son, the walls of the safe house closing in around her, Liana realized the truth. No one was safe. Not anymore. Because Enzo knew about Matteo, and everything had changed. She just didn't know how much. The answer came the next morning. Liana woke to voices in the living room. She sat up, disoriented, and realized she'd fallen asleep on the couch with Matteo still in her arms. Enzo was standing near the counter, talking to someone she didn't recognize. A woman, mid-40s, sharp suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Liana's stomach sank. She gently moved Matteo aside and stood, crossing the room. What's going on? Enzo glanced at her. This is Margaret Hale. She's a lawyer. Liana's blood turned to ice. What? Margaret extended a hand. Ms. Cruz, I've heard a lot about you. Liana didn't take it. She looked at Enzo. You called a lawyer? I needed advice. On what? On how to handle this situation legally. You mean how to take my son? I mean how to make sure he's protected. From who? From whoever comes next. Margaret cleared her throat. Mr. Varelli has asked me to draft a custody agreement. Liana's world tilted. No. Ms. Cruz, I understand this is difficult. You don't understand anything. He's my son. He's also Mr. Varelli's son, and he has rights. Rights? Liana's voice rose. He didn't even know Matteo existed 3 days ago. That doesn't change the law. I don't care about the law. Well, you should. Margaret's tone was calm, professional. Because Mr. Varelli could petition for full custody, and given his resources and your financial situation, he'd likely win. The words were a sledgehammer. Liana looked at Enzo, her chest heaving. Is that what you want? To take him from me? No. Then why is she here? Because I want this done right. I want a legal agreement that protects Matteo. And you. I don't need your protection. Yes, you do, because the people who want me dead now know about you and about him, which means you're both targets, and I'm not going to let that happen. So you're going to take him. I'm going to keep him safe by taking him from me. No, by making sure we're both part of his life. I don't want you in his life. The words came out before she could stop them. Enzo's expression went cold. Margaret looked between them. Perhaps I should give you two a moment. No. Enzo's voice was flat. Draft the agreement. Shared custody. Equal time. I'll cover all expenses. Medical, education, everything. Enzo, I really think, draft it. Margaret nodded and left. Liana stared at him, her hands shaking. I hate you. I know. I'll fight you. Go ahead. I'll take him and run. Try it. See how far you get. The threat was implicit, clear. Liana's breath came in gasps. Why are you doing this? Because I'm his father, and I'm not going to be shut out of his life because you're scared. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. You're terrified. Of me. Of this. Of the fact that you're not in control anymore. That's not... It is, and I get it. You've been doing this alone for 5 years. You've made every decision, every sacrifice. But that's over now, because he's my son too, and I'm going to be there for him, whether you like it or not. Liana's vision blurred. I can't do this. Yes, you can. No, I can't. I can't share him. I can't. Her voice broke. Enzo stepped closer. Liana, don't. Look at me. No. Look at me. She did, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Not anger, not coldness, but something else. Something that looked almost like, I'm not trying to take him from you, Enzo said quietly. I'm trying to be part of his life. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. And if you'd stop fighting me for 2 seconds, you'd see that. I don't trust you. I know. I don't even like you. I know that too. Then why are you doing this? Because he deserves better than what we had. Better than growing up with one parent wondering where the other one is. Better than feeling like half of him is missing. The words hit her like a fist. Because they were true. Liana sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out. And if we can't, then we keep trying. For him. She looked up at him through her tears. I'm scared, Enzo. I know. Not of you. Of this. Of what happens if it doesn't work. Then we make it work. How? I don't know yet, but we start by not fighting each other. Liana's throat closed. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that it wasn't that simple, that he couldn't just walk into their lives and demand a place. But she was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being scared, tired of doing this alone. So instead, she just nodded. Okay? Enzo's expression softened. Okay.
Months.
But the moment didn't last. Because that night, everything fell apart. Liana was reading to Matteo when Enzo's phone rang. He answered it in the other room, his voice low and tense. When he came back, his face was ashen. What? Liana asked. We need to move. Now. Why? Because they found us. Her stomach dropped. How? I don't know, but they're coming, and we have maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes. If we're lucky. Liana's hands started shaking. She looked at Matteo, who was watching them with wide, scared eyes. Mama? It's okay, baby. We're going on another trip. I don't want to. I know, but we have to. Enzo was already moving, grabbing bags, checking his gun, barking orders into his phone. Luca burst through the door. Car's ready. Let's go. They ran. Down the hallway. Into the elevator. Through the garage. Behind them, Liana heard voices. Footsteps. They were close. Too close. Enzo shoved her into the SUV, Matteo in her arms, and slammed the door. Drive, he told Luca. The SUV lurched forward. Gunfire erupted behind them. Liana screamed, covering Matteo's ears. Her body curled around him. Enzo fired back, his shots precise and controlled. The SUV screeched out of the garage and onto the street. But they weren't fast enough. A black van slammed into them from the side. The impact was deafening. The SUV spun, tires screaming, metal crunching. Liana's head smacked against the window. Pain exploded through her skull. The world went dark. When she came to, the SUV was on its side. Her ears were ringing. Her vision was blurred. She tried to move. Couldn't. Matteo! Her voice was hoarse. Matteo! A small cry from beside her. He was there, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but alive. Mama! I've got you, baby. I've got you. She tried to reach for him, but her seatbelt was jammed. Outside, she heard voices. Heavy boots on pavement. The door was wrenched open. Hands grabbed her, yanking her out. She fought, screamed, but they were stronger. They dragged her away from the SUV, away from Matteo, who was crying for her. Mama! Mama! Let me go! She kicked, clawed, bit. Someone hit her. The world tilted again. When her vision cleared, she was on her knees on the pavement. Enzo was beside her, blood streaming down his face, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Luca was on the ground, not moving, and standing in front of them, flanked by a dozen armed men, was someone Liana didn't recognize. A man in his 50s, well-dressed, calm. He looked at Enzo and smiled. "Hello, nephew." Enzo's expression went cold. "Uncle." The man's smile widened. "Did you really think you could kill my son and walk away?" Marco made his choice. "And now you're making yours." He gestured, and one of his men dragged Matteo out of the SUV. Liana's heart stopped. "No, no, please, don't hurt him, please." The man looked at her, then at Matteo, then back at Enzo. "Is this your son?" Enzo didn't answer. "I said, is this your son?" Silence. The man pulled out a gun and pressed it to Matteo's head. "Answer me," Liana sobbed. "Please, he's just a kid. Please don't." Enzo's voice was quiet, deadly. "Yes, he's my son." The man smiled. "Good. Then you'll understand what it feels like to lose one." He cocked the gun, and Liana's world shattered. The gun pressed against Matteo's temple was steady. Too steady. Liana's scream tore through the night air, raw and animal, a sound she didn't know she could make. Her body lurched forward, but hands gripped her shoulders, slamming her back down onto the pavement. Concrete bit into her knees, blood trickled down her shin from where she'd been dragged. "No, please, he's just a baby, please." Enzo's uncle, she still didn't know his name, didn't care, tilted his head, studying Matteo with the clinical detachment of someone inspecting merchandise. Matteo wasn't crying. He was frozen, his small body rigid, his eyes locked on Liana. The dinosaur had fallen from his hand. It lay on the ground beside the wrecked SUV, one arm torn off. "Please." Liana's voice cracked. She couldn't feel her legs, couldn't feel anything except the terror crushing her chest. "Take me instead. Kill me. Just let him go." The man smiled. Touching, but no. Enzo's voice cut through the chaos, cold and controlled despite the blood streaming from a gash above his eye. "You kill him, you lose your leverage." His uncle's smile widened. "Do I? You want me dead, fine. But you touch my son, and every family in this city will know you murdered a child. They'll turn on you. You'll have no allies, no protection, just enemies." Bold words from a man on his knees. Not words, fact. You know the rules, Sal. Kids are off limits. You break that, you're done. Sal's expression flickered, just for a second. Enzo pressed. Marco was a soldier. He knew the risks. This kid didn't choose any of this. You pull that trigger, you're not avenging your son. You're proving you're weak. The insult hung in the air. Sal's jaw tightened. His finger moved on the trigger. Matteo whimpered. Liana's vision blurred. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then Enzo did something she didn't expect. He looked at Sal and said, "If you're going to kill him, kill me first, so I don't have to watch." The words were quiet. Final. Sal stared at him. "You'd die for this boy?" Without hesitation. "Even though you've known him for less than a week?" "He's my son. That's all that matters." Something shifted in Sal's expression. Not mercy. Men like him didn't have mercy. But calculation. He lowered the gun from Matteo's head. Liana sobbed, her entire body shaking. Sal gestured to one of his men. "Put the kid in the van!" "No!" Liana screamed. "No, you can't!" "Shut her up!" A fist connected with her jaw. Pain exploded through her skull. She tasted blood. Through the haze, she saw Matteo being lifted, his small body kicking, his voice breaking as he screamed for her. "Mama! Mama! Matteo!" She tried to crawl toward him, but someone kicked her in the ribs. Air left her lungs in a rush. Enzo lunged, his hand still zip-tied, slamming his shoulder into the man holding Matteo. They both went down hard. Gunfire erupted, but not from Sal's men, from somewhere else. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons, close range, coming from the far end of the street. One of Sal's men dropped, blood spraying from his throat. Then another. Chaos. Sal's crew scattered, returning fire, shouting orders Liana couldn't understand. Enzo rolled, using the confusion to get to his feet. His hands were still bound, but he moved with brutal efficiency, slamming his forehead into the nearest guard's face. The man's nose shattered. He went down. Enzo grabbed the fallen man's knife with his teeth, twisted his body, and sawed through the zip ties in 3 sharp motions. His hands came free. He grabbed the guard's gun and fired twice. Two more of Sal's men fell. Liana's ears were ringing. The world moved in fragments, flashes of light, bodies hitting the ground. Mateo's screams cutting through the gunfire. She forced herself up, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and stumbled toward the van. Someone grabbed her from behind. She drove her elbow back, connecting with something soft. The grip loosened. She spun, clawing at the man's face, her nails tearing skin. He shoved her. She hit the ground hard. And then Enzo was there. He put 2 bullets in the man's chest without hesitation, then hauled Liana to her feet. "Can you run?" She nodded, even though her vision was swimming. "Then run." He half dragged her toward the van, where Mateo was still screaming, trapped in the back with 2 of Sal's men. Enzo fired. One man dropped. The other ducked behind the van, returning fire. Bullets punched through metal. Glass shattered. Enzo shoved Liana behind the wrecked SUV. "Stay down." "Mateo, I'll get him. Stay. Down." She wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but her body was giving out. Enzo moved around the SUV, using it for cover, his movements precise. He fired 3 shots. The second guard dropped. Then he yanked open the van door. Mateo launched himself into Enzo's arms, sobbing, his small hands clutching Enzo's shirt. "I've got you," Enzo said, his voice rough. "I've got you." He carried Mateo back to Liana, setting him in her lap. "Hold him. Don't let go." She wrapped her arms around her son, burying her face in his hair, her entire body shaking. Enzo reloaded, his eyes scanning the street. The gunfire had stopped. Sal's men were either dead or retreating, and the shooters, whoever they were moving closer. Liana's heart hammered. Who are they? No idea. Are they here to help us? Probably not. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Enzo stepped in front of Liana and Mateo, his gun trained on the lead figure. "That's close enough." The figure stopped, raised their hands, and spoke in a voice Liana recognized. "Relax, boss. It's me." Luca. He was alive. His face was a mess, bruised, bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but he was on his feet, flanked by 2 men Liana didn't recognize. Enzo lowered his gun slightly. Long story, short version. I called in favors. These are Dante's guys from the east side. They owe me." One of the men, tall, scarred, with a shaved head, nodded at Enzo. "We're square after this." Enzo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Agreed." Luca limped forward, his gaze shifting to Mateo. "Kid okay?" Mateo's face was buried in Liana's shoulder, his sobs quieter now, but still shaking his small frame. "He's alive," Liana said hoarsely. "That's all that matters." Luca's expression softened, just for a second. "Good." Enzo turned back to scan the street. "Where's Sal?" "Gone. He bailed when we opened fire." "How many men does he have left?" "Not many. We dropped 7, maybe 8. He's wounded, probably regrouping." "Where?" "If I had to guess, the old manufacturing district. He's got a warehouse there. Used it as a fallback before." Enzo's eyes narrowed. "Then that's where we're going." Liana's head snapped up. "What?" "No, we need to get Mateo somewhere safe." "There is nowhere safe, not while Sal's alive." "Then we run. We leave the city. He'll find us." Enzo's voice was flat, final. "He knows about Mateo now. He'll use that. He'll hunt us until one of us is dead. So we end this tonight." "You can't." "I can. And I will." Liana's grip on Mateo tightened. "Then I'm coming with you." "No. He's my son too." "Which is exactly why you're staying behind. Luca, get them somewhere secure." Luca hesitated. "Boss, that's an order. With respect, you're going to need every gun you've got. Sal's got at least 12 men left, maybe more. You go in there alone, you're not coming back." "Then I'm not coming back." The words hit Liana like a slap. She stood, still holding Mateo, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "If you die, he loses his father. Is that what you want?" Enzo turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her chest tighten. "I want him to grow up, safe, away from this. And the only way that happens is if Sal's gone. There has to be another way." "There isn't." "Enzo, This is the only way, Liana. You know it. I know it. So stop fighting me and let me do what needs to be done. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to grab him and shake him and tell him he was being stupid, reckless, suicidal. But she couldn't, because he was right. As long as Sal was alive, they'd never be safe. She looked down at Matteo, his face still pressed against her shoulder, and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Okay, Enzo blinked. What? Okay, you go. You end this, but you come back. You hear me? You come back. His expression softened. I'll try. Not good enough. You come back. For him. She looked up at Enzo, her eyes burning. He just found out he has a father. Don't make him lose you before he even gets to know you. Enzo's jaw worked. He stepped closer, crouching down so he was eye level with Matteo. Hey, kid! Matteo lifted his head slowly, his face streaked with tears and dirt. I need to go do something, Enzo said quietly. But I'm coming back. I promise. Matteo's lower lip trembled. You promise? I promise. You're not going to leave like the bad men said? Enzo's expression cracked. Just for a moment. No, I'm not leaving. I'm your dad, Matteo, and dads don't leave. The word, dad, hung in the air. Matteo stared at him, his young mind clearly trying to process. You're my dad? Enzo glanced at Liana. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He looked back at Matteo. Yeah, I'm your dad. Like a real dad? Like a real dad. Matteo's face crumpled. He launched himself at Enzo, wrapping his small arms around his neck. Enzo caught him, his expression shattering. He held Matteo close, one hand on the back of his head, and for a moment the hardened crime lord disappeared. All that was left was a father holding his son. Love you, Matteo whispered. Enzo's eyes closed. I love you too. Liana's chest heaved. She couldn't watch this, couldn't see Enzo hold their son like he might never see him again, because he might not. Enzo gently pulled back, setting Matteo down. You stay with your mom, okay? And you do what Luca says. Matteo nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Enzo stood, his mask sliding back into place. He looked at Luca. Get them to the Northside safe house. Don't leave them alone. Not for a second. You got it. And Luca? Yeah? If I don't come back, you make sure they're taken care of. Money, protection, everything. Understood? Luca's expression was grim. Understood. Enzo turned to Liana. They stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Don't die, she said finally. I'll do my best. I mean it, Enzo. Don't you dare die and leave me to explain to him why his father didn't come home. Enzo stepped closer. For a moment, she thought he might touch her, might pull her close the way he had that night 6 years ago. But he didn't. He just looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Take care of him. I always have. I know. He paused. And for what it's worth, you did a good job, raising him alone. He's a good kid. Her throat closed. Enzo, I have to go. He turned and walked toward the SUV Dante's men had arrived in, Luca limping after him. Liana watched him go, Matteo clinging to her leg, and felt something break inside her, because she'd just let the father of her child walk into a fight he might not win, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The ride to the Northside safe house was silent. One of Dante's men drove. Liana sat in the back with Matteo, who'd finally cried himself to sleep against her shoulder. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past, and tried not to think about what Enzo was walking into. Tried not to imagine him bleeding out on a warehouse floor. Tried not to picture Matteo growing up without a father. Again. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. Enzo's phone, the one he'd lent her days ago. A text from an unknown number. If you want to see him again, you'll do exactly what I say. Her blood turned to ice. Another text. Tell the driver to turn around. Head to the pier. Come alone. If you bring anyone, Enzo dies. Liana's hands shook. This wasn't Sal. The number was different. The tone was different. Someone else was playing. She looked at Matteo, still asleep, his face peaceful for the first time in hours. Then she looked at the driver and made a choice. Stop the car. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What? I said, stop the car. Lady, I've got orders. Stop the car. Something in her voice made him comply. He pulled over to the curb, the engine idling. Liana carefully shifted Mateo off her shoulder, laying him down on the seat. She kissed his forehead, her chest tight. Then she opened the door and stepped out. What are you doing? The driver asked. Taking care of something. Luca said, I don't care what Luca said. Keep my son safe. If I'm not back in 2 hours, take him to the safe house and don't let him out of your sight. Where are you going? She didn't answer, just started walking. Behind her, the driver shouted something, but she didn't stop, because whoever had Enzo or whoever was threatening him had just made a mistake. They'd underestimated her, and she was going to make them regret it. The pier was deserted. Liana walked slowly, her footsteps echoing on the old wooden planks. The smell of salt and rot filled her lungs. Water lapped against the pylons below, rhythmic and cold. At the end of the pier, a figure stood silhouetted against the city lights. A woman. Liana stopped 10 feet away, her heart pounding. The woman turned. Blonde hair, elegant dress. A face Liana had seen before. Isabella, Enzo's fiancée. The woman who was supposed to be dead. Liana's breath caught. You... surprised? Isabella's smile was cold. You should be. Took a lot of work to fake my own death. But Enzo believed it. He always believes what he wants to believe. What do you want? What do I want? Isabella laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. I want what's mine. Enzo, his empire, his money, everything. He's not yours. He was. Until you showed up. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what you've done? I spent 2 years building a life with him, planning, waiting for the right moment. And then you waltz in with your sob story and your bastard kid, and suddenly I'm irrelevant. He doesn't love you. He doesn't love you either. The words stung more than Liana wanted to admit. Isabella stepped closer. But here's the thing. I don't need his love. I just need him dead. And you're going to help me. I'm not helping you do anything. Oh, I think you will, because if you don't, your son dies. Liana's stomach dropped. You're bluffing. Isabella pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward Liana. A live video feed. The safe house. Mateo asleep on the couch. And standing over him, gun in hand, was one of Dante's men. The driver. Liana's world tilted. No. I own him. He works for me. Has for months. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to call Enzo. You're going to tell him you need him, that you're in danger. And when he shows up, my men will be waiting. I won't. Then your son dies. Right now. On camera. Liana's hands clenched into fists. You're a monster. I'm a survivor. There's a difference. Isabella's expression was calm, clinical. Now make the call or watch your son die. Liana's vision blurred. Her chest heaved. She pulled out the phone, dialed Enzo's number. It rang twice before he answered. Liana, what's wrong? His voice, rough, concerned, almost broke her. I need you, she said, her voice shaking. I'm at the pier. Someone's here. They're going to... I'm on my way. Stay where you are. He hung up. Isabella smiled. Good girl. Liana lowered the phone, her entire body trembling, and then she did something Isabella didn't expect. She lunged. Her fist connected with Isabella's jaw. The woman staggered back, shocked. Liana didn't stop. She drove her shoulder into Isabella's stomach, slamming her against the railing. Isabella screamed, clawing at Liana's face. They grappled, two women fighting with everything they had. Liana's training as a nurse's aide meant nothing here. This was raw, desperate. Isabella grabbed a fistful of Liana's hair and yanked. Pain exploded through her scalp. She twisted, bringing her knee up into Isabella's ribs. The woman gasped, her grip loosening. Liana shoved her hard. Isabella stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the pier. For a moment she teetered, arms windmilling, and then she fell. The splash was loud in the silence. Liana stared at the water, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. Isabella surfaced, gasping, thrashing. "Help! I can't!" Liana didn't move. She just watched as Isabella struggled, watched as the current pulled her farther from the pier, watched as her head went under, and didn't come back up. Liana's legs gave out. She sank to her knees, her entire body shaking. She'd just killed someone. Footsteps pounded on the pier behind her. She turned, her vision blurred. Enzo. He ran toward her, his face a mask of controlled panic. "Liana, are you—" He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? She couldn't speak, just pointed at the water. Enzo looked, saw nothing but dark waves. He turned back to her. "Who was it?" "Isabella." His expression didn't change. "She's dead?" "I think so." "You think or you know?" "She fell. I didn't pull her out." Enzo was quiet for a long moment. Then he crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Okay. Liana's voice cracked. "I just killed someone, Enzo. How is that okay?" "Because she was going to kill you. And probably me. And Matteo. So yeah, it's okay." I'm not like you. I can't just—" "I know." His voice softened. "But you did what you had to do. And that's all that matters." Liana's hands covered her face. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Enzo pulled her to her feet. "Come on, we need to move." "Matteo is safe. Luca just called. He took care of the driver. Your son's fine." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. Enzo steadied her. "But we're not done yet. Sal's still out there, and he's not going to stop." Liana looked up at him, her vision clearing. "Then we end it, tonight." Enzo's expression shifted. "We? You think I'm sitting this out after everything? No, I'm coming with you." "Liana, don't. Don't tell me to stay behind. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. I just killed a woman with my bare hands, Enzo. I think I can handle whatever comes next." He stared at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded. Okay. Okay? You want in? You're in. But you do exactly what I say. No arguments. Fine. And if I tell you to run, you run. Fine. I mean it, Liana. So do I. They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them. And then Enzo did something that surprised her. He smiled, just a little, just enough. "You're tougher than I thought." "You have no idea. No problem." The warehouse district was a graveyard of rusted metal and broken glass. Enzo's SUV, a replacement Luca had procured, rolled to a stop 2 blocks from Sal's location. Liana sat in the passenger seat, a gun in her lap. Enzo had shown her how to use it. Point, aim, squeeze. Don't pull. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. She felt numb, detached, like she was watching herself from outside her body. Enzo killed the engine. "Last chance to change your mind." "I'm not changing my mind." "Sal's men are trained killers. You're a nurse's aide." "I'm a mother. That makes me more dangerous." Enzo's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair point." Luca appeared at the window, his face still a mess but his eyes sharp. "Perimeter's set. Dante's guys are in position. We've got eyes on 6 hostiles inside, maybe more in the back." "Sal?" "3rd floor, northwest corner. He's got 2 guards with him." Enzo nodded. "We go in quiet. Take out the guards first. Then we move on Sal." "And if it goes loud?" "Then it goes loud." Liana's heart hammered. This was real. This was happening. They moved through the shadows, Enzo in front, Liana behind him, Luca covering their 6. The warehouse loomed ahead, windows dark, doors hanging crooked on broken hinges. They slipped inside. The air smelled like oil and decay. Liana's breath came in short bursts. She gripped the gun tighter. Enzo held up a fist. "Stop." Voices ahead, low, casual. 2 guards smoking near a stack of crates. Enzo gestured to Luca. Luca moved left. Enzo moved right. Liana stayed frozen. It happened in seconds. Enzo grabbed the first guard from behind, his arm around the man's throat, cutting off air. The guard struggled, but Enzo held firm until the man went limp. Luca took the second guard with a knife to the ribs. Quick, silent. Both men dropped. Liana stared, her stomach churning. Enzo glanced back at her. You okay? She nodded. They kept moving. Up the stairs, 1 floor, 2 floors, more guards, more bodies. Liana stopped counting. They reached the 3rd floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lit by a single flickering bulb. At the end, a door. Enzo motioned for Luca to stay back. Then he looked at Liana. When we go in, stay behind me, no matter what. She nodded. He kicked the door open. Gunfire erupted instantly. Enzo dove left, Liana right. Bullets tore through the doorframe, splintering wood. Enzo returned fire, his shots precise. 1 guard dropped, then another. And then the room went silent. Enzo stepped inside, gun raised. Sal stood in the center of the room, unarmed, his hands raised. But he was smiling. Enzo, I was wondering when you'd show up. It's over, Sal. Is it? You're out of men, out of options. Walk away now and I'll let you live. Sal laughed. You think I'm afraid of you? You should be. I'm not afraid of anything, especially not a man who's soft enough to care about a woman and a kid. Enzo's expression darkened. Last chance. Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead. But know this, I've already won. How do you figure? Because your son is never going to be safe, neither is she. Every family in this city knows about them now. And when you're gone, and you will be gone eventually, they'll come for them. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Liana's chest tightened, because Sal was right. As long as Enzo's enemies knew about Matteo, he'd always be a target. Enzo's jaw clenched. Then I'll make sure no one's left to come after them. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed in the enclosed space. Sal staggered back, blood blooming across his chest. He looked down at the wound, then up at Enzo, his expression almost surprised. You actually did it. I told you it was over. Sal sank to his knees, blood pooling beneath him, and then he smiled. It's never over. He collapsed. Liana stared at the body, her ears ringing. It was done. Sal was dead, but the words echoed in her mind. It's never over. Enzo lowered his gun, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at Sal's body. Then he turned to Liana. Let's go home. But they didn't make it home. Because as they stepped out of the warehouse, headlights flared to life. A dozen cars, maybe more, surrounding them. Enzo's grip on his gun tightened. Luca swore under his breath. Liana's heart stopped. Doors opened. Men stepped out, armed, silent. And at the center of them all, a figure Liana didn't recognize. A woman, older, elegant, authority radiating from every step. She stopped 10 feet away, her eyes on Enzo. Enzo Varelli. Enzo's expression was unreadable. Councilwoman DeLuca. The woman smiled. I think it's time we had a conversation. Liana's stomach dropped. Because whatever was about to happen, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. The headlights cut through the darkness like surgical blades, turning the warehouse district into an operating theater. Liana's eyes burned against the glare. She couldn't see the faces behind the lights, only silhouettes, armed, still, waiting. Enzo didn't lower his gun. Neither did Luca, but Liana could feel the shift in Enzo's posture. This wasn't the same tension as when they'd faced Sal's men. This was something else, something colder. Councilwoman DeLuca stepped forward, her heels clicking against broken asphalt. She was maybe 60, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Liana made in a year. But it was her eyes that stopped Liana cold, sharp, calculating, the eyes of someone who'd built power brick by brick and knew exactly how to wield it. Lower your weapons, DeLuca said. Not a request, a command. Enzo didn't move. Not until you tell me what you want. What I want is to prevent more bloodshed tonight. Salvatore Varelli is dead. His organization is in chaos. The city is watching, and right now, you're standing in the middle of a crime scene with a civilian and enough evidence to put you away for life. She paused, letting the words sink in. So I'm offering you a choice. I don't make deals. Everyone makes deals, Enzo. Your father understood that. Salvatore understood it. The only question is whether you're smart enough to understand it too. Liana's heart hammered. She looked at Enzo, but his face was unreadable. DeLuca continued. I represent interests far beyond this city. People who prefer stability over chaos. Your uncle's death creates a vacuum. That vacuum will be filled, either by you, under controlled circumstances, or by someone far worse. I'm here to ensure it's the former. And if I refuse, then my associates will ensure you never leave this parking lot, along with everyone you care about. Her gaze shifted to Liana for the first time, including her and the child.
Liana's blood ran cold. Enzo's grip on his gun tightened, his knuckles white. You threatening my family?
I'm stating facts. You've made powerful enemies, Enzo, but you've also proven yourself capable, ruthless when necessary, strategic, the kind of man who can maintain order. That's valuable. DeLuca took another step closer. So here's the deal. You take over your uncle's territories. You consolidate power. You keep the peace. In exchange, I make certain legal problems disappear. I ensure no retaliation from Salvatore's remaining allies, and I guarantee your family's safety. For how long? As long as you hold up your end. Which is? You answer to me. When I need something done, you do it. No questions. No delays. Enzo laughed, bitter, exhausted. So I trade one prison for another. You trade chaos for survival, for your son's future. That seems like a fair exchange. Liana couldn't stay quiet anymore. Don't listen to her, Enzo. We can leave tonight. We can disappear. You can't. DeLuca's voice was almost gentle. There's nowhere on this continent where you'd be safe. Not with the information that's already out there. Your son's existence, your connection to Enzo. You're a liability now, Ms. Cruz. The only way you stop being a liability is if someone powerful enough declares you protected. And that someone is you. That someone is the network I represent. Yes. Liana looked at Enzo, desperate. There has to be another way. But she could see it in his eyes. He was already calculating, already weighing the options, and coming to the same conclusion DeLuca wanted him to reach. There was no other way. Enzo lowered his gun slowly. What are the terms? DeLuca smiled. Smart boy. Your father would be proud. The terms were simple, brutal, inescapable. Enzo would absorb what remained of Sal's organization. He'd maintain order in the territories under DeLuca's oversight. He'd handle problems when they arose, the kind of problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. In exchange, DeLuca's network would ensure Liana and Matteo were untouchable. Any retaliation against them would be met with overwhelming force. They'd be ghosts, protected but invisible. But there was a cost. Enzo couldn't leave the city. Couldn't step away from the life. Couldn't pretend to be anything other than what he was. A weapon in someone else's hand. Liana listened to the terms in silence, standing beside the SUV while Enzo and DeLuca negotiated like business people discussing a merger. Luca leaned against the hood, his face grim, occasionally offering input. When it was done, DeLuca extended her hand. Enzo stared at it for a long moment. Then he shook. Welcome to the new order, Mr. Varelli. DeLuca's cars pulled away one by one, their headlights fading into the night until only darkness remained. Enzo stood in the empty lot, his shoulders slumped, the gun hanging loose in his hand. Liana approached slowly. Enzo. He didn't look at her. You didn't have a choice. I always have a choice. Not this time. There's always a choice, Liana. I just made the one that keeps you and Matteo alive. He finally turned to face her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was devastating. But don't pretend it was noble. I just sold whatever was left of my soul to keep my family safe. That's not heroic. That's just survival. Then we survive. Together. His laugh was hollow. Together. Right. You, me, and the councilwoman pulling the strings. I don't care who's pulling the strings as long as Matteo is safe. He'll be safe. But he'll also grow up knowing his father is a criminal. That everything I have, everything I am, comes from violence and blood. You think that's the life you want for him? Liana stepped closer, her voice fierce. I think he deserves to know his father. Even if his father isn't perfect. Even if the world he lives in is ugly. Because you know what the alternative is? Growing up thinking he wasn't wanted, that he wasn't worth fighting for. I lived that, Enzo. I'm not letting him live it too. Enzo's expression cracked. I don't know how to be a father. Neither do I know how to be a mother. But I figured it out. So will you. What if I screw it up? Then you screw it up, and we fix it. That's what parents do.
He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. Then he reached out and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was sudden, desperate. Liana froze for a second, then wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. They stood like that in the wreckage of the night, two broken people clinging to each other because it was the only thing that made sense anymore.
When they finally pulled apart, Enzo's voice was hoarse. "I need to see him." "Then let's go get him." The safe house was quiet when they arrived. Luca had called ahead. Dante's remaining men had cleared out, leaving only the original guard, the one who'd stayed loyal, standing watch outside. Liana pushed through the door first, her heart in her throat. Matteo was asleep on the couch, exactly where she'd left him. His dinosaur was clutched to his chest, one arm dangling off the cushion. She crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside him, her hand smoothing his hair. He stirred, his eyes opening slowly. "Mama? Hey, baby, I'm here. You came back." "I told you I would." "Where's Enzo?" Liana glanced back. Enzo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "He's here too." Matteo sat up, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Enzo, his face lit up. "Dad!" The word hit Enzo like a bullet. His whole body went rigid. Matteo scrambled off the couch and ran to him, wrapping his small arms around Enzo's legs. Enzo looked down at his son, his hands hovering uncertainly before finally settling on Matteo's shoulders. "Hey, kid. You came back. You promised." "Yeah, I did." Matteo pulled back, looking up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "Are the bad men gone?" Enzo crouched down so they were eye level. "Yeah, they're gone." "All of them?" "All of them." "So we're safe now?" Enzo hesitated. Liana could see the lie forming on his lips, the easy reassurance that would make Matteo feel better. But he didn't say it. Instead, he said, "We're safer than we were, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep it that way." It wasn't a promise. It was the truth. And somehow, that meant more. Matteo nodded seriously, like he understood. "Okay. Okay. Can I show you my dinosaur book tomorrow?" Enzo's expression softened. "Yeah. You can show me your dinosaur book. And can we get pancakes? If your mom says it's okay." Matteo turned to Liana, his face hopeful. "Can we, Mama?" Liana's throat was tight, but she managed to smile. "Yeah, baby, we can get pancakes." "Yay!" Matteo threw his arms around Enzo's neck again, squeezing tight. Enzo closed his eyes, his arms wrapping around his son, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Liana saw something other than pain on his face. She saw hope. They stayed at the safe house for 3 more days. Enzo used the time to consolidate power, making calls, arranging meetings, ensuring that everyone who mattered understood the new hierarchy. DeLuca's influence smoothed the transition. Former rivals fell in line, territories were redistributed without bloodshed, and the city settled into an uneasy peace. Liana used the time to breathe. She called her supervisor at the hospital, claimed a family emergency, and bought herself 2 weeks. She called the restaurant, quit on the spot. The tips weren't worth the risk anymore, and she watched Enzo with Matteo. It was awkward at first. Enzo didn't know how to talk to a 5-year-old, didn't know what games to play or how to answer the endless questions. But he tried. He sat through an hour-long explanation of every dinosaur species Matteo could remember. He built towers out of blocks just to watch Matteo knock them down. He read bedtime stories with the stilted delivery of someone who'd never read aloud before. And slowly, Matteo stopped seeing Enzo as a stranger. He started seeking him out, asking for him when he woke up, saving his best drawings to show him. One night, Liana found them asleep on the couch together. Matteo curled against Enzo's chest, Enzo's arm wrapped protectively around him. She stood in the doorway, her eyes burning, and realized something that terrified her. She was falling for him. Not the man she'd met 6 years ago, grief-stricken and reckless. Not the crime lord who'd pulled her into this nightmare, but the man who read dinosaur books with the same intensity he used to plan executions. The man who held their son like he was the most precious thing in the world. The man who'd killed to protect them. And she didn't know what to do with that. On the 4th day, Enzo told her it was time to go home. "Home where?" Liana asked. They were in the kitchen, Matteo playing in the next room. Enzo poured coffee, his movements automatic. Your apartment's not safe anymore. They trashed it looking for you. Besides, it's too exposed. So where then? Enzo slid a set of keys across the counter. I bought a house, north side. Good neighborhood, good schools. 3 bedrooms, a yard, safe. Liana stared at the keys. You bought a house. Yesterday. Just like that. Just like that. Enzo, I can't. It's not for you, it's for Matteo. He needs stability. A place where he can grow up without looking over his shoulder. He paused. You don't have to live there if you don't want to. I can set you up somewhere else. But the house is his, and it's protected. Liana picked up the keys, the metal cold in her palm. What about you? What about me? Where are you going to be? Enzo's expression was carefully neutral. I've got business to handle. DeLuca's already lining up jobs. I'll be around, but I can't. He stopped, his jaw working. I can't be there all the time. It's not safe for any of you. So what? You're just going to show up every few weeks? Play dad when it's convenient? No. I'm going to show up as much as I can without putting a target on his back. That's the deal, Liana. I keep the city stable, you and Matteo stay safe. But that means distance. It means you're choosing this life over him. I'm choosing his safety over my own happiness. There's a difference. Is there? Enzo's control slipped. What do you want me to say? That I'm going to quit? Walk away from everything and pretend the last 15 years didn't happen? I can't do that. The people I answer to now won't let me. So yeah, I'm choosing distance, because the alternative is watching him get hurt because of me. Liana's hands shook. He's 5 years old, Enzo. He doesn't understand distance. He just knows his dad isn't there. Then help him understand. How? I don't know. You're the one who's been doing this for 5 years. You figure it out. The words were harsh, unfair, and true. Liana set the keys down. Fine. I'll explain it to him. I'll tell him his dad loves him, but can't be around because he's too busy running a criminal empire. I'm sure that'll go over great. Liana, no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to swoop in, promise him the world, and then disappear because it's complicated. He deserves better than that. I know he does. That's why I'm doing this. This isn't protecting him. This is protecting yourself. Enzo's expression went cold. You think I want this? You think I want to be the dad who misses birthdays and soccer games because I'm too busy cleaning up messes? I don't. But I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. Not anymore. I made my choice when I shook DeLuca's hand, and now I have to live with it. They stared at each other, the kitchen suddenly too small, the air too thick. Finally, Liana said, So do we. She grabbed the keys and walked out. Again, the house was beautiful. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a backyard with a swing set already installed. The kind of place Liana had dreamed about but never thought she'd afford. Matteo ran through every room, his excitement infectious. Mama, look, I have my own room, and there's a swing. Can I go outside? In a minute, baby. Let me check the locks first. She did a full walkthrough, testing windows, checking doors. Everything was reinforced, cameras on every corner, an alarm system that looked like it belonged in a bank. Enzo had thought of everything. She hated how much that meant to her. That night, after Matteo was asleep in his new bed, surrounded by unpacked boxes and stuffed animals, Liana sat on the back porch and let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd lost. The apartment that had been hers, even if it was falling apart. The independence she'd fought so hard to build. She cried for the future she didn't know how to navigate. A future where Enzo was part of Matteo's life but not hers, where safety came with strings attached. She cried because she'd killed someone and hadn't processed it yet. And she cried because despite everything, she didn't regret warning Enzo that night at Romano's. Because if she hadn't, Matteo wouldn't have a father, and she wouldn't have learned what it felt like to not be alone. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her look up. Enzo. He got out slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Liana wiped her eyes, but didn't stand. He crossed the yard and sat beside her on the steps, keeping a careful distance. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Enzo said, I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be a father. Be whatever this is. I've spent my whole life building walls, keeping people out. And now there's this kid who looks at me like I hung the moon, and I don't know how to be what he needs. You think I knew what I was doing when he was born? I was terrified. I still am. You don't look terrified. That's because I've had 5 years to get good at faking it. She looked at him. You don't have to be perfect, Enzo. You just have to show up.
What if showing up puts him in danger? Then we deal with it, together. You keep saying that, together, but you hate me. Liana's breath caught. I don't hate you. You should. I dragged you into this. I threatened to take your son. You saved our lives multiple times. You killed for us. You gave up whatever future you might have had to keep us safe. So no, I don't hate you. She paused. I don't know what I feel, but it's not hate. Enzo turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was devastating. What is it then? Liana didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, and she wasn't ready to say it. So instead, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, tentative at first, then firm. They sat like that as the sun set, two people who'd been thrown together by violence and bound by something neither of them could name. And for the first time in days, Liana felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. 3 months later. Mateo's 6th birthday party was small. A few kids from his new school, Mrs. Tron, who'd somehow found them and refused to let Liana pay her back for all those nights of babysitting, and Luca, who showed up with a remote-controlled dinosaur that immediately became Mateo's favorite thing. Enzo arrived late, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd been in. Mateo saw him and screamed, "Dad!" before launching himself across the yard. Enzo caught him, lifting him up, and for a moment the hardness in his face disappeared completely. Liana watched from the porch, her chest tight. He'd kept his word. He showed up. Not every day, sometimes weeks would pass. But he called. He texted. He sent pictures. He made sure Mateo knew he mattered. And slowly, impossibly, they'd built something. Not a traditional family. Nothing about this was traditional. But it was theirs. After the party, after the kids went home, and Mateo crashed on the couch in a sugar coma, Enzo helped Liana clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, throwing away paper plates, packing up leftover cake. He had fun, Enzo said finally. Yeah, he did. You did good, with the party. Thanks. Enzo set down the trash bag and looked at her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happy? The question caught her off guard. What? Here, in this house, with this life. Are you happy? Liana thought about it, really thought. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning, working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, terrified she'd lose Mateo to exhaustion or bad luck. Now she had a house, security. Mateo was thriving in a good school. She'd started taking nursing classes again. Enzo had offered to pay. She'd refused, but he'd somehow arranged a scholarship that covered everything. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. But was she happy? I don't know, she said honestly. I'm safe. Mateo's safe. That's more than I had before. But happy? She shook her head. I don't think I've figured out what that means yet. Enzo nodded slowly. Yeah, me neither. Are you asking because you want to know if I regret this? Do you? No. The answer came without hesitation. I regret a lot of things, but not this. Not him knowing you. Something in Enzo's expression shifted. I need to tell you something. Liana's stomach dropped. What? DeLuca's moving me. New territory, West Coast. It's a promotion, technically. More responsibility. More distance. Yeah. Liana's throat closed. For how long? 6 months. Maybe a year. A year. I'll still visit. I'll fly back as much as I can. And I'll call every day. I promise. Enzo, I know it's not fair, but it's the job. And if I don't take it, someone else will. Someone who won't give a damn about keeping you and Mateo protected. Liana sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. He's going to be devastated. I know. He's finally starting to trust that you're not going to disappear. I'm not disappearing, you're leaving. It's the same thing to him. Enzo sat beside her, the space between them heavy. What do you want me to do? I want you to stay. I can't. Then I want you to figure out how to explain this to a 6-year-old without breaking his heart. Because I don't know how. Enzo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Come with me. Liana's head snapped up. What? Come with me. You and Mateo. I'll set you up out there. Same deal. House, security, everything. You can finish your nursing program. Mateo can go to school. And I'll be there. Not all the time, but more than I can be now. You're serious. I'm serious. Liana stared at him, her mind racing. Leave everything. Again. Uproot Mateo. Move across the country with a man she still wasn't sure she could trust. It was insane. But then she thought about Mateo's face when Enzo walked through the door. The way he lit up. The way he'd started calling him Dad without hesitation. She thought about the nights she'd spent alone in this house, wondering if Enzo was safe, if he was coming back. She thought about the fact that for the first time in her life, she wasn't doing this alone. And she realized something. She didn't want to be alone anymore. Okay. Enzo blinked. Okay. Okay. We'll come. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. A smile, small but real, crossed Enzo's face. Yeah? Yeah. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, and this time when he pulled her close, she didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. 6 months later. West Coast. The new house was bigger than the last one. Ocean view, palm trees in the yard. A neighborhood where people didn't ask questions. Mateo loved it. He'd made friends at his new school, joined a soccer team, started asking if they could get a dog. Liana had finished her nursing program and gotten a job at a hospital 20 minutes away. The hours were better. The pay was better. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. Enzo was still Enzo, gone more than he was home, handling problems she didn't ask about, coming back with bruises he wouldn't explain. But he was there for the important things. Soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, bedtime stories, and slowly, impossibly, they'd become something that looked like a family. One night, after Mateo was asleep, Liana and Enzo sat on the back deck, watching the ocean. Do you ever regret it? Liana asked. Regret what? That night, at Romano's. If I hadn't warned you, none of this would have happened. Enzo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, If you hadn't warned me, I'd be dead. Mateo wouldn't have a father, and you'd still be working 2 jobs, wondering if you were going to make rent. He looked at her. So no, I don't regret it. Not even the parts that hurt? Especially not the parts that hurt, because those are the parts that got us here. Liana's throat tightened. I don't know what we are, Enzo. What do you want us to be? She turned to face him, her heart pounding. I want us to be real. Not just 2 people co-parenting, not just survivors. I want... She didn't get to finish, because Enzo leaned in and kissed her. It was nothing like that night 6 years ago, desperate and reckless and fueled by grief. This was careful, intentional. A question. Liana answered by kissing him back. When they finally pulled apart, Enzo rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this either, he said quietly, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Liana's hands framed his face, her thumbs brushing over the scars she'd come to know. Okay. 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 They sat like that, holding each other, while the ocean whispered against the shore. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't look like a fight. It looked like a choice. 2 years later, Mateo was 8, growing like a weed, still obsessed with dinosaurs, but now also obsessed with soccer and video games and asking questions about everything. Liana had been promoted to head nurse in her unit. She'd bought a car, her first new car ever. She'd made friends, built a life. Enzo had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, delegating more, spending more time at home. He coached Mateo's soccer team. He taught him how to fish. He showed up. They still fought, still struggled, still had nights where Liana wondered if this was sustainable. But they also had mornings where Mateo crawled into bed between them, talking about his dreams.
Afternoons where they cooked dinner together, Enzo burning everything he touched while Matteo laughed. Evenings where they sat on the deck and just existed. They weren't perfect, but they were theirs. One night, after Matteo was asleep, Enzo pulled a small box from his pocket. Liana stared at it, her heart stopping. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Enzo said quickly. "Not yet. But I want you to know that's where this is going. If you'll have me." Liana opened the box. Inside was a simple ring. Nothing flashy, just a band with a single stone. She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "Enzo, You don't have to answer now. Just think about it." But Liana didn't need to think. She'd spent 5 years alone, convinced she had to do everything herself, that needing someone was weakness. Enzo had proven her wrong, not because he was perfect, not because he'd saved her, but because he'd stayed. Through the fear, through the violence, through the moments when running would have been easier. He'd stayed, and that was enough. "Ask me," she said. Enzo blinked. "What?" "Ask me now." He stared at her, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering in his eyes. Then he knelt. Right there on the deck, under the stars, he knelt. "Liana Cruz, will you marry me?" Liana's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Yes? Yes." Enzo stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her like she was the only thing that mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Liana was laughing through her tears. "We're insane." "Probably. This is never going to be normal." "I don't want normal. I want you. Even though I killed your ex-fiancée, especially because you killed my ex-fiancée." Liana laughed harder, and Enzo joined her, and for a moment everything else fell away. The violence, the fear, the complicated web of deals and obligations that tied Enzo to a world Liana would never fully understand. None of it mattered, because they had this, they had each other, and they had a future. 1 year later. The wedding was small, just family. Luca stood as Enzo's best man wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. Mrs. Tran cried through the entire ceremony. Matteo was the ring bearer, taking his job so seriously it made everyone smile. Liana wore a simple dress. Enzo wore a suit he'd bought specifically for this. And when they said their vows, promises to love, to protect, to show up even when it was hard, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, at the reception, Matteo pulled Enzo aside. "Does this mean you're staying?" Enzo crouched down, eye level with his son. "Yeah, kid. I'm staying. Forever? Forever." Matteo threw his arms around Enzo's neck, holding tight. Enzo closed his eyes, his arms wrapping around his son, and felt something he'd never felt before. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth fighting for. 5 years later. Matteo was 13, taller than Liana now, still sweet, but starting to push boundaries the way teenagers do. Enzo had fully stepped back from active operations, transitioning into an advisory role. He still took calls, still handled problems when they arose, but he was home most nights, coached soccer, helped with homework, argued with Matteo about screen time. Liana ran her own clinic now, a community health center in an underserved neighborhood. It was hard work, exhausting, but it was hers. They'd had another kid, a daughter, Emma. 3 years old and fearless. Their life wasn't perfect. Enzo still had nightmares. Liana still had moments where she looked over her shoulder. But they had each other, and they had their family. One evening, Liana found Enzo on the back deck, watching the sunset. She sat beside him, her hand finding his. "What are you thinking about?" "That night. At Romano's." "Yeah? You could have walked away, could have kept your head down. But you didn't." "I couldn't." "Why?" Liana thought about it. The real answer, the one she'd never fully articulated. "Because I saw you. Not the crime lord. Not the man everyone was afraid of. I saw someone who was about to die because the person he trusted most had betrayed him. And I couldn't live with that." She looked at him. "So I guess I didn't save you. You saved me." Enzo's hand tightened around hers. "We saved each other. Yeah, I guess we did. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ocean, listening to Mateo and Emma arguing about something inside. And Liana realized something. This was happiness, not the absence of struggle, not perfection, but this. Sitting beside someone who'd seen her at her worst and stayed anyway, raising kids who felt safe enough to argue, building a life that was messy and complicated and real. She'd spent years surviving, now she was living, and it was enough. That night, after the kids were asleep, Enzo pulled Liana close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For warning me. For staying. For giving me a chance I didn't deserve." Liana looked up at him, her hand resting over his heart. "You deserved it. You just didn't believe it yet. Do you believe it now?" "Yeah, I do." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promises neither of them had words for. And when they finally pulled apart, Liana whispered the word she'd been too afraid to say for years. "I love you." Enzo's eyes closed, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you too." They stood like that, holding each other in the quiet house, their family sleeping around them. And for the first time in either of their lives, the darkness didn't feel so heavy. Because they'd found something stronger. Not power, not control, but love. The kind that survived violence and fear and impossible odds. The kind that built families from wreckage. The kind that proved, against all logic, that sometimes the most dangerous choice you can make is the one that saves you. Liana had made that choice in a dimly lit private dining room at Romano's. And it had changed everything. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it.